"This is my first night here," the young Apache woman whispered to the rancher, trembling with fear. The sun was sinking slowly behind the distant mountains, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The wind carried a cold bite, and the young Apache woman wrapped her thin shawl tighter around her shoulders. She had traveled for days across rugged terrain, guided by her family's instructions, and finally reached a small, isolated ranch in the heart of New Mexico. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mix of exhaustion, fear, and curiosity. She had never been this far from her home before, never seen the open plains stretch endlessly in every direction, and never been among people so different from those she knew. She stepped carefully onto the wooden porch of the ranch house. The boards creaked beneath her feet, and the sound made her flinch. The rancher, a tall man with a weathered face and kind eyes, opened the door before she could knock. He was carrying a lantern, and its warm glow painted gentle shadows across the doorway. He looked at her with curiosity and patience, as if he were trying to understand the fear and hope in her young eyes. "This is my first night here," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the wind. She trembled, not from the cold, but from uncertainty. She did not know what to expect in this new place, what the people would think of her, or whether she would be able to survive in a world so different from her own. The rancher stepped aside, holding the door open. "Come in, child. You are safe here," he said gently. His voice was calm, carrying a warmth that eased some of the tension in her chest. She nodded slightly, hesitating for a moment as she glanced at the empty landscape beyond the porch. The sky was darkening, and the first stars were beginning to appear. The shadows of the mountain stretched long and mysterious, and she felt small in the vastness of it all. As she entered the house, she noticed the smell of wood smoke mixed with the faint scent of cooking. It was different from anything she had known before. Inside, the house was simple but clean. A fireplace crackled softly in the corner, and the warm light danced across the wooden walls and floor. A few simple pieces of furniture filled the room, a table, chairs, and a large bed in the corner. Everything seemed strange, yet strangely inviting. The rancher led her to a chair near the fire. "You must be tired," he said. "Sit here and rest for a moment." She lowered herself onto the chair, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her shawl. Her mind was racing with thoughts of her family, wondering if they were worried about her and whether they would ever see her again. She had left home with their blessing, but that did little to calm the ache of leaving the familiar behind. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, rattling the windows. The young woman flinched at every sound, her senses alert to every movement and shadow. She was not used to such isolation. In her village, there were always people around, always the hum of life and chatter of family. Here, the silence pressed heavily against her, making her feel vulnerable. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind seemed louder than it should. The rancher noticed her unease. "It will take time," he said softly, as if reading her mind. "The first night is always the hardest. You will grow used to this place." She nodded, but words failed her. How could she explain the mixture of fear and wonder that filled her heart? How could she describe the loneliness of being so far from everything she had ever known, yet the strange pull of curiosity about this new life? She looked around the room, noticing small details that made her feel a little more comfortable. The fireplace was built carefully, the stones arranged neatly. A pot of stew simmered gently on the stove, sending up a rich, savory aroma that reminded her faintly of the meals her mother used to prepare. A small rug lay on the floor, worn but clean, and the furniture seemed sturdy and practical. These small signs of care told her that the people in this house were not unkind, that perhaps she would find safety here. The rancher brought her a cup of warm tea, its steam curling into the air. "Drink this. It will warm you," he said. She accepted it with shaky hands, the warmth of the liquid spreading slowly through her body. She took small sips, feeling some of her tension ease. The rancher sat across from her, his expression patient, giving her the space she needed to adjust. As she sipped her tea, she allowed herself to look more closely at the rancher. His face was weathered from years of working under the sun and wind, and there were lines around his eyes and mouth that told stories of hard work, loss, and survival. But his eyes were gentle, filled with a quiet kindness that made her heart beat a little slower. For the first time in hours, she felt a tiny spark of hope that she might find safety here, that this place could become something more than just a strange, lonely stop on her journey. The young woman thought about her family. She remembered her mother's gentle hands, her father's deep voice, and her siblings' laughter. She thought about the life she had known and the traditions she cherished. She wondered how much she would be able to keep of that life in this new place. The thought made her anxious but also determined. She wanted to survive, to adapt, and perhaps in time to thrive. The wind outside grew stronger, rattling the windows with sudden gusts. The young woman shivered and pulled her shawl tighter. She realized she could not stay in fear forever. She had to learn to live in this world, to face its unknowns with courage. Slowly, she began to calm herself, breathing in the warm, smoky air of the house and letting the steady presence of the rancher ease her trembling. Hours passed quietly. The sky outside turned a deep blue and the stars shone more brightly, casting silver light across the landscape. The young woman watched them for a moment, feeling a strange connection to the world beyond her own home. Though she was far from her family, she felt that the earth itself was the same, and that gave her a small measure of comfort. She began to imagine what her life here could be like, dreaming cautiously of safety, friendship, and perhaps even belonging. Finally, the rancher gestured toward the bed. "You should rest. Tomorrow will be a long day and you will need your strength." She nodded and slowly rose, her body stiff from the long journey. The bed was simple but soft, and she sank into it, feeling the warmth of the blankets surround her. For the first time since she had arrived, she allowed herself to relax fully, letting her fear ebb slightly. As she lay there, the young woman whispered again, though this time not to the rancher but to herself. "This is my first night here." The words were no longer filled with trembling fear, but with a quiet acknowledgement of a new beginning. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, nor the challenges she would face, but she felt a tiny spark of courage, a faint hope that perhaps this place could become home. Outside, the wind continued to whisper, the stars continued to shine, and the ranch house stood quietly in the vast, open land. Inside, the young woman closed her eyes, her mind alive with thoughts of her journey, her family, and the life she hoped to build. Though the night was long and the world uncertain, she felt the first true sense of safety she had known in days. It was only the beginning, but it was enough to carry her into sleep. The first night was always the hardest, but she was learning that even in a strange, new place, courage could grow quietly, like a small flame protected against the wind. And in that quiet house far from her home, the young Apache woman began to find her first sense of belonging, one trembling step at a time. The morning sun rose slowly over the vast plains, painting the ranch in soft golden light. Birds chirped, and the distant mountains glowed faintly under the early light. The young Apache woman awoke from a deep, uneasy sleep, her body stiff from the long journey. The room felt warmer than the cold night had been, but she still clutched her shawl as she swung her legs over the edge of the bed. She could hear the faint sounds of life outside, the lowing of cattle, the creaking of a gate, and the occasional bark of a dog. It was a new world, and every sound reminded her that she was far from home, far from the small village where she had grown up. She rose slowly, her bare feet touching the wooden floor, and moved to the window. From there, she could see the ranch spread out before her. It was a simple place, with a few wooden buildings, a small corral for the animals, and wide-open fields stretching as far as her eyes could see. The sun reflected off the dusty ground, and she noticed tiny movements, cows grazing, a horse pawing at the dirt, and a few chickens scratching near the barn. Everything felt alive, yet everything was so different from what she had known. The rancher was already moving about, feeding the animals. He noticed her at the window and smiled warmly. "Good morning," he called. "Did you sleep well?" The young woman hesitated but nodded. "Yes, thank you," she whispered. Her voice was soft, still cautious, but there was a small spark of confidence in it. She realized she would have to learn the rhythms of life here, or she would struggle. The rancher nodded, as if understanding her thoughts, and continued his work without another word, letting her observe. She stepped outside, the cool morning air brushing her face. The ground was still damp with dew, and the smell of earth and animals filled her senses. She took slow, careful steps, unsure of where to go or what to do first. The rancher approached her and handed her a small bucket. "We start with the chickens," he said gently. "They need water and food. Then we'll take care of the other animals." The young woman hesitated, looking at the bucket. In her village, she had never done such work. Her family had farmed small crops, but tending to a large herd of animals was different. Yet, something inside her stirred, a mixture of curiosity and determination. She took the bucket and followed the rancher toward the chicken coop. The birds clucked and scattered as she approached, and she struggled to pour water without spilling it everywhere. The rancher smiled patiently, showing her how to hold the bucket steadily and place the water carefully. As the day went on, she learned the names of the animals and how to care for them. There was a gentle cow named Daisy, a spirited horse called Thunder, and a flock of chickens with feathers of every color. She discovered that the animals responded to kindness and patience. If she moved slowly and spoke softly, they were calm. If she rushed, they grew anxious. This lesson reminded her of life in her village, where her mother had always taught her to respect the animals and the land. The morning passed quickly, filled with small successes and quiet lessons. She found herself enjoying the rhythm of work, the simple satisfaction of seeing the animals cared for. Yet, the weight of the cultural difference pressed on her. She noticed that some of the nearby settlers watched her with suspicion. Children stared, and adults whispered quietly among themselves. She felt the sting of isolation, knowing she did not fully belong here, that her Apache heritage marked her as different. At noon, the rancher called her inside for lunch. A simple meal awaited: bread, cheese, and fresh fruit. She had never tasted apples so sweet, nor bread so soft. As she ate, she listened to the rancher speak of life on the land, of hard winters and harsh summers, of animals lost and crops saved. He spoke with a calm wisdom, a patience that reminded her of her father's voice when he taught her to hunt and gather. After lunch, she returned to the fields to help with other chores. The sun was higher now, warm against her back, and she felt her muscles grow tired from the constant movement. Yet, with each task completed, she felt a quiet pride. She began to notice the beauty in small things, the way the wind moved through the grass, the soft hum of insects in the warm air, and the steady, reliable rhythm of life on the ranch. Slowly, the fear that had gripped her the night before began to loosen its hold. In the afternoon, she accompanied the rancher to check on the cattle in the far fields. The ground was uneven, and the trail wound through rocky patches and low hills. She stumbled a few times, but he was always near, offering a guiding hand. Along the way, he told her stories of the land, how it had been passed down through generations, how the settlers and the native people had once clashed, and how survival depended on respect for the earth and its creatures. She listened carefully, understanding that these stories were lessons as much as history. As they reached the cattle, a small calf had become stuck in the mud. The young woman's heart leapt into her throat. She had never faced such a situation before. But instinctively she remembered what her mother had taught her, how to remain calm, how to observe, and how to act carefully. She helped the rancher free the calf, using her strength and patience. The calf finally stood, shaking off the mud, and nuzzled her hand. She smiled, feeling a surge of pride and relief. The rancher nodded approvingly, a rare smile spreading across his face. "You are learning quickly," he said. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. The young woman wiped sweat and dirt from her face, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and accomplishment. She had faced new challenges, learned unfamiliar tasks, and survived in a strange and sometimes intimidating world. She realized that the first day on the ranch had been more than work. It had been a lesson in courage, patience, and resilience. As they walked back to the house, she noticed more of the landscape, the rolling hills, the scattered trees, and the distant mountains that framed the horizon. She felt a quiet connection to the land, a sense that this place, though foreign, could become familiar. Perhaps, she thought, she could learn to belong here without losing herself, without forgetting who she was and where she came from. That evening, as she helped prepare a simple dinner, she observed the rancher more closely. He was a man of quiet strength, shaped by years of hardship but softened by patience and kindness. He never demanded more than she could give, never criticized, but offered guidance when necessary. She felt a small trust growing between them, a sense that she was not completely alone in this world. After the meal, she stepped outside once more. The stars shone brightly, clearer than any she had seen in her village. The wind whispered gently through the grass, and the sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cattle, the distant barking of dogs, created a rhythm that was oddly comforting. She realized that fear was still there, lingering at the edges of her mind, but it was no longer overwhelming. She had survived the day, learned new skills, and taken her first steps toward finding a place in this strange world. Sitting by the fire that night, she allowed herself to reflect on the day. Every small task, every careful step, every moment of courage had taught her something new, not just about life on the ranch, but about herself. She realized that fear was natural, but so was courage, and that each day brought a chance to grow stronger, braver, and wiser. As the fire crackled and the rancher went about his evening chores, she whispered quietly to herself, "I am learning. I am surviving. I am beginning to belong." Though she was still far from home, she felt a quiet hope, a feeling that perhaps this new life could hold safety, friendship, and purpose. And for the first time, the young Apache woman allowed herself to imagine a future where she could walk confidently across the plains, not just as a stranger, but as someone who belonged. The night grew deeper, and the world outside settled into calm silence. She closed her eyes, her body tired but her mind alive with thoughts and dreams. The first day on the ranch had been difficult, full of fear and uncertainty, but it had also been filled with small victories, quiet lessons, and the beginnings of connection. She had survived, learned, and begun to adapt. As she drifted into sleep, the young woman held onto a simple truth. Each day would bring challenges, but each day would also bring the chance to grow. And with that thought, she felt a little less afraid, a little more ready to face the unknown, and a little closer to finding her place in this new and vast world. The next morning, the young Apache woman woke to a soft, golden light spilling through the window. She had grown accustomed to the sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cows, the clatter of the chickens, the soft whisper of the wind through the trees, but today felt different. There was a quiet sense of expectation in the air, as though the land itself was urging her forward. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed, her body still stiff from the work of the previous day, and took a deep breath. She stepped outside to find the rancher already at work, guiding a small group of cattle toward the barn. When he noticed her, he gave a small nod. "Good morning," he said. "Today, we will check the fences and move the cattle to the far pasture. It will be a long walk, but you will learn much about the land." She nodded, swallowing a small lump of nervousness. Each day brought new tasks, new challenges, but she was learning to face them with courage. She followed him across the fields, her eyes drinking in every detail, The color of the soil, the sway of the grass, the way sunlight danced on the hills. Every detail felt alive, teaching her lessons she had never imagined she would learn. As they walked, the rancher spoke about the animals. "Cattle are sensitive creatures," he said. "They can sense fear, anger, or kindness. You must be calm, patient, and gentle." The young woman nodded, remembering her mother's words about respecting all living things. She had learned to read the subtle signals of the land, the forest, and the animals. She realized that many of those lessons could guide her here as well. When they reached the far pasture, she saw that the herd had wandered closer to a small stream. Some calves were struggling to reach the water, their hooves sinking slightly in the muddy banks. Her heart leapt as she instinctively moved to help, recalling her mother's lessons about careful observation and gentle guidance. She knelt by the edge of the stream, whispering softly to the calves, guiding them toward the shallow water. The rancher watched silently, impressed by her natural understanding and patience. After the cattle were settled, the rancher suggested they take a brief rest. They sat under the shade of a large oak tree, its branches stretching wide and offering cool relief from the sun. The young woman leaned back against the rough bark, her heart slowing as she looked out over the fields. For the first time, she felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond mere survival. She was contributing, helping, and understanding this new world in a way that made her feel stronger. The rancher broke the quiet with a story. "When I was young," he said, "I worked on my father's ranch. I had to learn everything by trial and error. I made many mistakes, and the land taught me patience. You will make mistakes too, but that is how we grow." She listened intently, realizing that mistakes were not failures but lessons, and that she could learn and adapt. His words gave her courage, a feeling she had not experienced since leaving her village. After resting, they returned to the main ranch, where the young woman helped with the chores. She fed the chickens, collected eggs, and prepared water for the animals. The repetitive tasks became a rhythm, almost comforting. She noticed how the animals responded differently to her presence now, less fearful, more trusting. Even Daisy, the gentle cow, approached her calmly, nuzzling her hand. The young woman smiled, feeling a quiet bond forming. As the afternoon passed, a neighbor arrived at the ranch, a woman with a kind face and gentle manner. She had heard of the young Apache girl and wanted to offer help. At first, the young woman felt nervous, unsure how to interact. She had spent much of her life among her own people, and interacting with outsiders still carried a weight of caution. But the woman spoke softly, asking questions about her journey, her family, and her life in the village. Slowly, the young woman began to share her story, feeling a spark of connection that had been missing for so long. The neighbor smiled warmly. "It is not easy to come to a new place," she said. "But you are brave, and I can see that you will find your way." The young woman felt a small glow of pride. Perhaps she could belong here. Perhaps she could find friendship even outside her own culture. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying, but she embraced it nonetheless. Later, the rancher called her to help with a more challenging task, repairing a section of the fence that had been damaged in a recent storm. She had never handled tools before, but he guided her patiently, showing her how to hold the hammer, position the nails, and secure the boards. At first, she struggled, her hands unsteady and unsure, but with each attempt she improved. She felt the satisfaction of completing a task with her own hands, a feeling that filled her with confidence. As the sun dipped low, they finished their work. The young woman's hands were sore, her arms tired, but her spirit was alive with accomplishment. She had faced new challenges, learned new skills, and discovered strengths within herself that she had never realized existed. The rancher nodded approvingly, a quiet pride in his eyes. "You are learning quickly," he said simply. The words made her chest swell with a sense of achievement she had never felt before. That evening, the rancher invited her to sit by the fire as he worked on repairing a small wooden gate. She watched him carefully, asking questions about each step, eager to understand. He answered patiently, explaining the purpose of each movement, the importance of precision, and the need for patience. She realized that learning here was not just about physical tasks. It was about observing, thinking, and understanding the world in new ways. As night fell, the young woman helped prepare a simple dinner. She had grown more confident in the kitchen, learning how to chop vegetables, stir pots, and prepare meals with care. She noticed that even small tasks required attention and patience, and that each success, no matter how minor it seemed, added to her sense of belonging. She felt a quiet pride in herself, knowing that she was contributing to the life of the ranch, not merely existing within it. After dinner, she stepped outside to the porch, looking out at the vast expanse of land. The stars sparkled brilliantly, reflected in the calmness of the night. She thought about the people in her village, about the family she had left behind, and about the journey that had brought her here. She realized that life was full of challenges, but it was also full of opportunities to grow, to connect, and to discover her own strength. She returned to the fire where the rancher was sitting quietly. They spoke of small things, animals, the land, the weather, but gradually their conversation deepened. She shared stories of her childhood, the lessons her parents had taught her, and the traditions of her people. The rancher listened carefully, never interrupting, his eyes reflecting respect and genuine interest. She had never experienced such patience before, and it touched her deeply. The night grew quiet, the wind softening, the world settling into a gentle calm. She felt a sense of peace she had not known since leaving her home. The rancher's patience and kindness, the small successes of the day, and the bonds she was beginning to form all combined to create a feeling of belonging, tentative but real. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future in this new world, not as a stranger but as someone who could find her place. As she prepared for bed, she reflected on the day's lessons. Fear was still present, but it no longer controlled her. She had faced challenges, adapted to new routines, and begun to form connections with people outside her own culture. Each step had been difficult, but each step had also brought growth, courage, and understanding. She felt a quiet pride in herself, a sense that she was capable of more than she had imagined. Lying down, she whispered softly, "I am learning. I am growing. I am beginning to belong." The words felt like a promise to herself, a recognition of the courage and resilience she was discovering within. The rancher's presence, the support of neighbors, and the simple lessons of the land were shaping her in ways she had never anticipated. She was no longer the frightened girl who had arrived days ago. She was becoming a young woman capable of facing the challenges of this new life. The stars outside shone brightly, the quiet of the night wrapping around the ranch like a protective blanket. She closed her eyes, letting the calmness of the evening settle over her. Tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, and more lessons, but she felt ready. She had taken the first steps toward understanding, belonging, and surviving in this strange new world. And with that thought, she drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep, carrying with her the quiet joy of accomplishment and the hope of connection. The days on the ranch grew longer and more demanding, yet the young Apache woman found herself slowly adjusting to this new life. She had learned the rhythm of the land, the patterns of the animals, and the careful attention required to survive in a place so different from her village. But as her confidence grew, so did the challenges. The world outside the ranch was not always kind, and not every neighbor looked on her with patience or understanding. One morning, she awoke to the sound of distant voices outside the fence. Curious, she moved to the window and peered out. A small group of settlers had gathered near the edge of the property. She could see the caution in their expressions, the way they exchanged quick, whispered words before glancing in her direction. Her stomach tightened. She had expected curiosity, but she had not anticipated suspicion, or worse, judgment. She knew from the stories her parents had told her that being different could sometimes draw fear or hostility, and she felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. The rancher noticed her hesitation and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Do not worry," he said quietly. "Not everyone will understand you, but that does not mean you are not welcome here. Focus on your work and let time show your worth." His calm presence eased her nerves slightly, though the knot in her stomach did not fully loosen. She stepped outside and began the day's chores, trying to keep her mind focused on the animals. Daisy the cow greeted her gently, and Thunder, the spirited horse, stomped his hooves in playful anticipation. The simple tasks, the feeding, the watering, the cleaning, were grounding, offering a sense of control in a world that sometimes felt overwhelming. Each animal she cared for reminded her of lessons from her childhood: patience, observation, and respect for life. As she moved across the fields, she noticed a group of children from the nearby settlement approaching. At first, they watched her from a distance, whispering to one another. She could feel their eyes on her, their curiosity tinged with unease. She remembered the fear she had felt on her first night, the uncertainty of being in a strange place, and she took a deep breath. She greeted the children softly, offering a small smile. One of the children, braver than the rest, stepped forward. "Are you really from the Apache village?" he asked. His tone was cautious, almost questioning, as if he wanted to be sure he was seeing the truth. The young woman nodded, sensing both fear and curiosity in his eyes. She did not know how he would react, but she tried to respond kindly, explaining simply that she had come to live on the ranch and help the rancher. The children's curiosity began to soften into interest. They asked questions about her life, her family, and the animals she cared for. She answered with patience, careful to choose her words so they could understand. Slowly, a small bridge formed between them, a tentative friendship beginning to grow. It was a small victory, but it gave her courage, reminding her that connection was possible even across differences. Later that day, as she was gathering firewood near the edge of the forest, a sudden rustling caught her attention. A wild animal, startled by her presence, charged from the underbrush. Her heart raced, and for a moment fear paralyzed her. But instinct took over. She remembered how her father had taught her to stay calm in the forest, how to observe, how to move carefully. She dropped the bundle of wood, stepped sideways, and raised her arms to appear larger. The animal paused, then retreated into the shadows, leaving her shaken but unharmed. The rancher appeared from the distance, having noticed her absence. He approached quickly, concern etched on his face. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, still trembling slightly, her pulse slowly returning to normal. He placed a hand on her shoulder again. "You handled that well," he said. "Fear is natural, but you did not let it control you. That is the mark of strength." His words filled her with a mixture of pride and relief. She realized that every challenge, no matter how frightening, was teaching her resilience. The days continued with a mixture of routine and unexpected challenges. One afternoon, a sudden storm rolled across the plains. Dark clouds gathered quickly, and fierce winds swept through the fields. The young woman worked alongside the rancher to secure the animals, sheltering the chickens and guiding the cattle into safer areas. The rain poured down, drenching her clothes, but she did not falter. She shouted instructions when necessary, moving with determination. When the storm finally passed, the rancher looked at her with quiet approval. "You have grown stronger," he said. "You are learning to face the unpredictable world with courage." Even with these successes, there were moments of doubt. She sometimes overheard whispers from the neighbors, murmurs that questioned her presence or doubted her abilities. Those moments stung, reminding her that acceptance would not come easily, yet she refused to let them shake her. She focused on what she could control: her work, her learning, and the small bonds she was forming with the rancher and the children who had begun to trust her. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the rancher asked her to help him repair a section of the barn roof. It was difficult work, requiring strength and careful balance. She climbed the ladder with determination, her hands gripping the wood tightly. With each nail she hammered into place, she felt a sense of accomplishment, a recognition of her own abilities. The rancher worked alongside her, offering guidance but never criticism. She realized that challenges were not meant to break her. They were meant to teach her, to help her grow stronger and more confident. After the work was complete, they stood together, looking out over the ranch. The young woman felt a deep connection to the land, a sense that she was part of something larger than herself. She had faced fear, danger, and doubt, and she had emerged stronger each time. The rancher placed a hand on her shoulder, a quiet gesture of trust and recognition. She felt warmth in her chest, knowing that she had begun to earn her place here, even if the world outside still held uncertainty. That night, she sat by the fire, reflecting on the day. She thought about the wild animal she had encountered, the storm she had helped endure, and the small victories she had achieved with the children and the animals. Each event was a lesson, a reminder that resilience was built through action, patience, and courage. She realized that fear would never fully disappear, but it could be managed, and with each challenge faced, it would grow smaller. She thought of her family, wondering how they would feel if they could see her now. She imagined their pride and hope, and it gave her strength. She whispered quietly to herself, "I am stronger than I thought. I can face this world." The words felt like a promise, a quiet declaration of her determination to survive, to adapt, and to thrive. The rancher returned from his evening chores, settling beside her by the fire. They spoke in soft tones, sharing stories and reflections. He told her of times when he had faced danger, loss, and hardship, and how he had learned to trust his instincts and remain calm under pressure. She listened carefully, absorbing each lesson, realizing that the life she was building here required both physical strength and emotional resilience. As the night grew deeper, the young woman allowed herself to feel a quiet sense of pride. She had faced fear and uncertainty, had learned new skills, and had begun to form connections that brought comfort and hope. She understood now that challenges were not obstacles to escape from, but opportunities to grow, to discover strength, and to find her place in the world. Lying in bed that night, she thought about the first night she had arrived at the ranch, trembling with fear and uncertainty. She smiled softly to herself, realizing how far she had come. The fear was still there, yes, but it no longer controlled her. She had faced danger, survived, and grown stronger. Each day brought new lessons, and each lesson brought her closer to understanding herself and the world around her. She closed her eyes, her mind filled with thoughts of courage, resilience, and hope. The stars outside shone brightly, and the quiet of the night wrapped around the ranch like a gentle embrace. She felt a sense of belonging beginning to form, tentative but real, and she knew that she was ready for whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. For the young Apache woman, the journey was far from over. There would be more storms, more fears, and more doubts. But she also knew that she had the strength to face them, the wisdom to learn from them, and the courage to continue growing. Each day, each challenge, and each connection brought her closer to a life where she could survive, thrive, and belong. And with that thought, she drifted into a deep, peaceful sleep, carrying the quiet confidence that she had begun to master the lessons of resilience and courage. The days on the ranch had grown into weeks, and the young Apache woman had begun to find a rhythm in this new life. Each morning, she rose early to help with the animals, tending to the cows, horses, and chickens with a confidence that had been absent when she first arrived. Her hands were calloused from work, her arms strong, and her mind clear and alert. But beyond the physical strength she had gained, something deeper had changed. She felt a sense of belonging beginning to take root in her heart. The rancher noticed the change, too. His eyes, once filled with quiet curiosity when he looked at her, now carried respect. She had proven herself capable, not just with work but with patience, wisdom, and courage. He often spoke of her determination and the way she approached challenges without fear. She had become more than a guest on his land. She had become an integral part of the ranch, someone he trusted and depended upon. One afternoon, the young woman ventured further across the fields, checking on the distant cattle. The sun was warm, and the air carried the sweet smell of grass and earth. She moved confidently, calling out softly to the cows, guiding them carefully through the pastures. She noticed a small calf struggling to keep up with the herd and instinctively ran to help it, her hands steady and sure. The calf nuzzled her gently, and she felt a deep, quiet joy in this connection. The animals, once cautious and distant, now approached her with trust, recognizing the care she offered. As she worked, she spotted children from the nearby settlement watching from a distance. They waved shyly, and she waved back, a smile lighting her face. The bond she had begun to form with them had grown stronger. They often came to help with the smaller chores, and in turn, she taught them what she had learned about the land, the animals, and survival. The young woman realized that she was no longer an outsider but a bridge between two worlds, showing the children the value of respect, kindness, and patience. That evening, the rancher invited her to sit with him by the fire. The wind rustled softly through the trees, and the stars sparkled brilliantly above. They spoke quietly of the day's work, but gradually their conversation deepened. She shared stories of her childhood in the Apache village, of the songs her mother sang, the lessons her father taught, and the small rituals that had marked each day. The rancher listened intently, never interrupting, and sometimes sharing his own memories of the land, of struggles and triumphs, of lessons learned through hardship. The young woman realized that these conversations had become a source of comfort and strength. She had begun to trust him, not just as a guardian or teacher, but as a friend. In return, she felt that she had earned his respect and genuine care. This connection was something she had longed for since leaving her family, a sense of safety, understanding, and acceptance in a world that had once seemed so foreign and intimidating. A few days later, a neighbor stopped by the ranch to invite her to a small gathering. At first, she hesitated. She was still cautious of outsiders, aware that some would never fully understand or accept her, but the rancher encouraged her gently. "Go," he said. "It is a chance to meet others and show them who you are. You have nothing to fear." With a mixture of nervousness and curiosity, she attended the gathering. The neighbors greeted her with tentative smiles, some curious, some cautious. She introduced herself politely, answering questions about her life and sharing simple stories of her experiences on the ranch. Slowly, the tension in the room eased. The neighbors began to see her not as someone strange or different, but as a person who had proven herself through hard work, courage, and kindness. By the end of the evening, a quiet acceptance had begun to form, a recognition that she belonged not only to the ranch but to the wider community as well. As she walked home that night, the young woman reflected on the journey she had taken. She remembered her first night at the ranch, trembling and fearful, uncertain if she could survive in a world so unfamiliar. She thought of the challenges she had faced, the wild animals, the storms, the moments of doubt and isolation. Each obstacle had tested her, but each had also taught her resilience, patience, and courage. She had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident, learning not just to survive, but to thrive. Back at the ranch, the fire burned softly, casting a warm glow across the room. She settled into her bed, feeling the strength of the day in her body and the quiet pride of accomplishment in her heart. For the first time, she allowed herself to think of the future without fear. She could imagine a life here, among these people and animals, a life where she could contribute, belong, and be respected. She realized that her journey had brought her to a place where she could honor her heritage while embracing new experiences, creating a bridge between the two worlds she loved. The next morning, the young woman awoke to a clear, bright day. She stepped outside to find the rancher waiting with a small basket of freshly picked vegetables and bread. "Breakfast," he said with a smile, "a reward for your hard work and perseverance." She accepted it gratefully, feeling the warmth of kindness and recognition. As she ate, she looked around at the fields, the animals, and the distant mountains, feeling a deep sense of peace. This land, once strange and intimidating, had become familiar. The rancher, once a figure of cautious guidance, had become a friend and mentor. The neighbors, once wary, had begun to see her as one of their own. During the day, she worked alongside the rancher, tending to the animals, repairing fences, and preparing meals. Each task felt purposeful, each moment meaningful. She noticed how the land responded to her touch, how the animals recognized her voice, and how the people around her had come to trust her judgment. She realized that acceptance was not something given automatically. It was earned through patience, dedication, and kindness. And she had earned it. That evening, the young woman and the rancher sat outside under the vast, star-filled sky. They spoke of the past, of struggles and lessons, and of hopes for the future. She shared her dreams of continuing to learn, to care for the animals, and perhaps one day to guide others who might come to the ranch. The rancher listened with quiet pride, understanding the depth of her growth and the strength she had discovered within herself. As night fell, the young woman walked to the edge of the field, looking out over the land she had come to know and love. The stars reflected in her eyes, and the quiet of the night filled her with a sense of belonging. She realized that the journey she had begun, trembling and uncertain, had led her to a place of confidence, connection, and hope. She whispered softly to herself, "This is my first night, of many to come, and now I am ready." She returned to the ranch house, feeling a quiet joy and a deep sense of peace. The fire crackled in the hearth, and the warmth of the room enveloped her. She looked at the rancher, who nodded with approval, and then at the animals resting nearby, their calm presence comforting her. For the first time since leaving her village, she felt fully at home, not just in the house, but in the life she had built, the bonds she had formed, and the land that had become a part of her. The days continued, but each day now carried a sense of promise rather than fear. She worked, learned, and shared her skills with those around her. She became a source of guidance and strength for the children, a trusted helper for the rancher, and a quiet bridge between the settlers and her own people. She realized that life was not about avoiding challenges, but about facing them with courage, kindness, and patience. She had learned to survive, and now she was learning to live fully and meaningfully. As the sun set each evening, she would often stand at the edge of the field, looking out over the land, feeling the connection between her past and present. She honored her heritage while embracing the new life she had created. She understood now that belonging was not about losing oneself, but about finding ways to bridge differences, to learn from others, and to share one's own strength and wisdom. One quiet night, she sat by the fire, reflecting on the journey from fear to courage, from uncertainty to confidence, from isolation to belonging. She thought of the first night she had arrived, trembling and uncertain, and smiled softly. She had grown in ways she had never imagined. She had faced fear, danger, and doubt, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected. She whispered quietly, almost to the wind, "I am here. I belong. I am part of this world now." The words were not just a statement, but a recognition of the journey, the growth, and the acceptance she had earned. The rancher nodded gently, understanding the depth of her realization, and the animals stirred softly around her, as if acknowledging her presence. The young Apache woman had arrived at the ranch uncertain, fearful, and unsure of her place in a world that seemed vast and unfamiliar. But through courage, patience, hard work, and connection, she had found not only survival but belonging. The land, the animals, the rancher, and the community had become part of her life, and she had become part of theirs. She understood that this was only the beginning of a life filled with challenges and lessons, but she now faced the future with confidence and hope. As the fire burned low and the stars sparkled overhead, she closed her eyes, carrying with her the quiet pride of achievement, the warmth of belonging, and the hope of many nights and days to come. She was no longer a frightened girl. She was a young woman who had discovered her strength, her courage, and her place in the world.